Every time the semiconductor industry reaches a new milestone, the spotlight usually falls on increasingly sophisticated lithography machines. The common assumption is that producing smaller, faster, and more efficient chips always requires more advanced optics, more complex engineering, and equipment that costs hundreds of millions of dollars. For years, that belief has defined the direction of modern chip manufacturing. But what if one of the industry's most interesting developments isn't making lithography more complicated? What if, instead, it makes part of the process surprisingly simpler? A growing number of engineers are revisiting an idea that has existed for decades, but has struggled to reach large-scale commercial production. Instead of projecting intricate circuit patterns onto a silicon wafer using highly advanced optical systems, this method physically transfers the pattern directly onto the material through a precision-engineered template. The concept sounds almost too straightforward for an industry built on some of the world's most complex machines, yet recent developments suggest it may finally be ready for specific, real-world applications. The technology is known as Nanoimprint Lithography, and while it isn't designed to replace every manufacturing process inside a semiconductor fabrication plant, it could offer a meaningful advantage where conventional methods become unnecessarily expensive. Rather than competing with the most advanced logic chip production, Nanoimprint focuses on a different opportunity: manufacturing photonic devices whose repetitive structures make direct pattern replication both practical and potentially far more economical. Recent announcements from China have brought renewed attention to this approach. According to the companies involved, a newly validated manufacturing process has successfully produced photonic chip patterns across full 8-inch wafers, while significantly reducing the number of traditional lithography steps required. If these results prove scalable in commercial production, the implications could extend beyond a single factory. Lower manufacturing costs for photonic components could accelerate innovation in industries ranging from optical communications and AI data centers to autonomous vehicles, robotics, and advanced sensing technologies. However, separating engineering potential from commercial reality is essential. Impressive laboratory demonstrations do not automatically translate into profitable mass production. In semiconductor manufacturing, consistency, yield, and reliability ultimately matter more than headline specifications. Today on Future Structures, we're examining how nanoimprint lithography works, why engineers believe it could reshape part of the photonic chip industry, what makes this manufacturing approach fundamentally different from conventional DUV lithography, and whether this reported breakthrough represents a genuine shift in semiconductor economics or simply another promising technology that still has to prove itself on the factory floor. To understand why nanoimprint lithography is attracting renewed attention, it's important to first understand why conventional chip manufacturing has become one of the most expensive industrial processes ever developed. When people hear the word lithography, it's often described as a printing process. In reality, it is much closer to an extremely precise optical manufacturing system. Every microscopic feature that eventually becomes part of a semiconductor must be transferred onto a silicon wafer with extraordinary accuracy. At today's technology nodes, engineers are working with structures measured in nanometers, dimensions so small that even the slightest vibration, temperature fluctuation, or alignment error can affect the final product. The process begins by coating a silicon wafer with a photosensitive material known as photoresist. A carefully designed circuit pattern is then projected onto that surface using highly sophisticated optical equipment. Light selectively exposes specific regions of the resist, allowing manufacturers to develop and transfer the intended pattern into the material beneath. This sequence is repeated over and over again, layer after layer, gradually building the complex architecture that forms a finished semiconductor device. The challenge is that modern chips aren't created in a single exposure. A high-performance processor may require dozens of carefully aligned manufacturing stages, each one depending on the absolute precision of the previous step. Every additional layer introduces another opportunity for tiny variations that can reduce manufacturing yield or affect chip performance. Maintaining that level of consistency demands some of the most advanced machinery ever built. This is why lithography systems have become so valuable. The equipment must combine ultra-precise optics, advanced motion control, sophisticated software, contamination management, and environmental stability inside a single manufacturing platform. Wafer stages move at remarkable speeds, while maintaining positioning accuracy measured in must remain perfectly calibrated throughout production, while the manufacturing environment itself is carefully controlled to minimize particles, vibration, and thermal expansion. None of this comes cheaply. Beyond the cost of acquiring these machines, manufacturers also invest heavily in maintaining them, calibrating them, and integrating them into highly automated fabrication facilities. Every exposure consumes time. Every process step requires additional resources. And every extra layer increases both production complexity and operating costs. As semiconductor designs become more sophisticated, those costs continue to rise. For companies producing advanced chips at scale, even small improvements in manufacturing efficiency can translate into significant financial savings. Reducing the number of process steps, shortening production time, or simplifying equipment requirements can have a meaningful impact on both capital expenditures and long-term operating costs. That economic reality explains why researchers continue searching for alternative manufacturing techniques. The goal isn't necessarily to replace conventional lithography across the entire semiconductor industry. In many applications, existing optical systems remain the best available solution. Instead, engineers are asking a more practical question. Are there specific types of chips where a different manufacturing method could deliver comparable precision at a much lower cost? That question has brought renewed attention to nanoimprint lithography, not as a universal replacement for DUV processes, but as a specialized manufacturing approach that could simplify production for certain classes of semiconductor devices, particularly photonic chips with highly repetitive nanoscale structures. The idea may appear surprisingly simple. The engineering challenge behind making it work, however, is anything but. Most advances in semiconductor manufacturing focus on improving the tools that project patterns onto a silicon wafer. Nanoimprint lithography takes a completely different approach. Instead of refining optical systems, it asks a more fundamental question: what if the pattern didn't need to be projected at all? The concept changes the manufacturing process at its very beginning. Rather than using beams of light to expose a circuit design onto a photosensitive surface, nanoimprint lithography starts with a precision-engineered template that already contains the required nanoscale pattern. This template functions as a highly accurate mold capable of transferring microscopic structures directly into a specially prepared resist layer deposited on the wafer. The process begins by coating the wafer with a material designed to flow under carefully controlled pressure. Once the wafer is positioned, the patterned template is aligned above its surface. Instead of exposing the resist through an optical projection system, the template is gently pressed into the material. As pressure is applied, the resist fills every microscopic groove etched into the mold. After the material hardens, the template is lifted away, leaving behind an exact physical replica of its nanoscale features. Additional manufacturing steps then transfer that replicated pattern into the underlying semiconductor material, allowing the production process to continue. From a conceptual standpoint, the difference is striking. Traditional lithography relies on precisely controlled light to reproduce a design over and over again. Nanoimprint lithography relies on direct physical replication. One method creates a pattern through optical projection. The other creates it through contact between a master template and the wafer itself. A useful comparison is the difference between painting the same detailed image by hand every day and using a carefully crafted engraving plate. Producing the original plate requires exceptional precision and engineering, but once it exists, reproducing the same design becomes significantly more straightforward. That principle is exactly what makes nanoimprint lithography so appealing for certain semiconductor applications. Because the pattern already exists inside the template, manufacturers can potentially reduce the number of optical exposure steps required during production. Eliminating some of those stages may shorten manufacturing time, simplify equipment requirements, and lower production costs for devices whose structures are well suited to direct replication. This is particularly attractive for photonic chips, where many optical components contain highly repetitive nanoscale features. Instead of generating those patterns through repeated optical exposure, a single template may reproduce them consistently across large sections of the wafer. However, the apparent simplicity of the idea can also be misleading. Unlike conventional optical lithography, nanoimprint brings the template into direct contact with the wafer. At dimensions measured in billionths of a meter, even an almost invisible contaminant can distort the final pattern. Uneven pressure, trapped air, slight material inconsistencies, or tiny imperfections in the mold itself can all affect manufacturing quality. In other words, replacing light with physical contact solves some engineering challenges while introducing entirely new ones. That balance between opportunity and risk explains why nanoimprint lithography has remained under development for many years. The concept has always been technically compelling. The real challenge has never been demonstrating that it works once. It has been proving that it can deliver the same level of precision, consistency, and reliability across thousands of wafers in a commercial manufacturing environment. And that is where the next chapter of the story begins. If nanoimprint lithography sounds like a simpler way to manufacture semiconductor devices, it's because, at a conceptual level, it is. But simplicity in theory does not always translate into simplicity in production. In semiconductor manufacturing, even the most promising ideas must survive one unforgiving test: repeatable mass production. This is exactly where nanoimprint lithography has faced its greatest obstacles. Unlike conventional optical lithography, where light transfers a pattern without physically touching the wafer, nanoimprint depends on direct contact between the template and the resist layer. At nanometer dimensions, that physical interaction introduces an entirely new set of engineering challenges. The first and perhaps most critical issue is contamination. Inside a semiconductor fabrication facility, even microscopic particles are treated as serious threats. A particle invisible to the human eye can become enormous relative to structures measured in just a few nanometers. If dust, residue, or any foreign material becomes trapped between the template and the wafer, the pattern may not transfer correctly. Worse still, if the template itself becomes contaminated, the same defect can be reproduced repeatedly across multiple wafers, multiplying production losses. Pressure control presents another major challenge. The template must contact the wafer with extraordinary uniformity from edge to edge. Too much force in one region can deform the resist, while too little pressure elsewhere may leave sections of the pattern incomplete. Even tiny differences in force distribution can affect feature dimensions, creating inconsistencies that reduce device performance. Engineers also have to manage the behavior of the resist itself. The material must flow evenly into every nanoscale cavity of the template before it hardens. If the resist spreads unevenly or leaves gaps inside microscopic features, the final pattern may no longer match the intended design. Maintaining a consistent residual layer across the entire wafer is therefore essential for ensuring predictable results during the later etching stages. Template separation introduces another layer of complexity. Once the pattern has been transferred and the resist is cured, the mold must detach cleanly without damaging the newly formed structures. At such small dimensions, adhesion forces become surprisingly significant. If the template sticks to the resist for even a fraction of a second too long, delicate nanoscale features may stretch, fracture, or lift away from the wafer entirely. Then comes alignment. Most semiconductor devices require multiple manufacturing layers stacked with exceptional precision. Every new pattern must align almost perfectly with those already created beneath it, while advanced logic processors demand the highest alignment accuracy. Photonic devices also require extremely consistent positioning to ensure predictable optical behavior. Production speed adds yet another consideration. A manufacturing process can demonstrate remarkable technical performance in a laboratory while remaining economically impractical inside a high-volume factory. Semiconductor manufacturers evaluate not only precision but also throughput. Every additional second required to process a wafer affects factory output, equipment utilization, and ultimately production costs. This is why commercial semiconductor manufacturing is judged by far more than resolution alone. A technology may achieve impressive nanoscale features, but if it produces excessive defects, operates too slowly, or requires frequent maintenance, it struggles to compete against established manufacturing methods. In this industry, success is measured not simply by engineering achievement, but by the number of reliable functional chips that leave the production line day after day. That reality explains why nanoimprint lithography has remained a niche technology for so many years. The challenge has never been proving that the concept works. The challenge has been proving that it can deliver the consistency, reliability, and production efficiency required by one of the world's most demanding manufacturing industries. Interestingly, that challenge becomes much more manageable when the technology is applied to a very specific category of semiconductor devices, photonic chips, where the underlying structures differ significantly from the complex circuitry found inside modern processors.